I wish I'd been here for the dark experience. It's kind of interesting to hear about that because I had actually been thinking about how you could use light, so it was interesting to hear that you guys had worked with dark.
Well, and a lot of light too.
Okay.
iPhone lights.
iPhone lights, yeah.
Yes, interestingly though, in the video you hardly see that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
it was incredibly present.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I actually closed my eyes for a while because there was so much light, it was distracting me from the sound.
Mhm.
My feeling also in response to what you said about it not being that interesting in terms of improvisation and sound and how to include the audience, I think one of the things that I felt was happening in the room was that everybody was really involved, actually. You were involved and in some way Kate was even involved and in trying to video everything in this impossible way. That it's your description of the experience as it was mediated through
A 2D medium.
well, and that was not even adapted for that situation. It was so different to me than what I experienced.
Mm.
So funny, I like the video.
That I don't even know what to say really, because I felt like we were really using the like what that darkness afforded to us by being able to for example, for me personally, as someone, it's too bad Emiliani's not here because I don't see myself as an expert on the recorder. I mean, I stopped being an expert on I was never really an expert on the recorder anyway. So if I'm going to define myself as a performer, then I'm nothing, because I'm not an expert in anything. And if expertise is what is required to be a performer, then I'm a total failure. So in that darkness, I was able to, for example, move around and make very specific contact with every person in the room. And that was something that I wouldn't necessarily dare to do in the full light of day, or certainly not in a stage light. But it was also not, I think also the instructions or our goal in that moment was not necessarily to create something for performance. It was to experience what was possible in that, what we were led to through the presence of that instrument, and through the possibilities of dark and light, and the iPhones also, they happened sort of spontaneously at some point. They started to have these moments of light, and then that created these different corridors and shadows. And so my feeling after, I felt very elated after that, session. And I felt like we had really used up all of the possibilities of the space. And however it appeared on video, or however, my feeling was that there was going to be some kind of translation of that idea of the using up of the space, and all the people in it, and we had been talking already about having the people on stage and stuff like that. So it was interesting to. It's interesting to me to hear that that sonically it was not as effective, but for me it was not just about just about the sound and our expertise as sound makers, although I guess that's why we're here. But there were a lot of other things that were happening, and I think that's one of the things that we're being brought to through these experiences with the media. It's like how do we bring those in a convincing way? So it's
It's kind of funny too, because when they've done experimentation with people, how people listen under light conditions, And it's been done where people have been in total darkness, been done where people have been asked to just close their eyes, and then also done where people just have their eyes open and are listening. And their experience of the same sounds are completely different. So that's kind of an interesting thing as well, that if you walk through a city, if you walk down a city block, and you're just walking as comme d'habitude, what you will key into sonically is very different in terms of how sounds reflect off of buildings, etc. Those aren't going to be your concerns. The type of sounds that you actually will focus in on are different than if you are being, for example, led down that block with your eyes closed versus walking down the same block where it's in total darkness. So your experience of the space, in addition to the types of sound that you focus in on, are different. So that's something kind of that could be maybe considered as well. Even the act of moving in a dark space versus just being asked to close your eyes changes how that same sound is perceived. You know, so that could be maybe considered as something to play with as well.
And also there was a play of visualization, I felt, where the sound was really guiding us through what we see in the space. I felt like there was the sound was very visual in that moment.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm reporting what I see on a 2D screen.
Of course.
And it was mostly black, actually.
Probably, yes.
Everything was black. To the point where I just said that I actually stopped watching because watching a black screen is not so interesting. I just close my eyes and listen. And then I may have, missed. I saw a few cell phone lights at the beginning, but not much anymore in the middle. Now the question, I like your idea, Terry, of what did you say? Using up the space, or that kind of. What does the space have to offer, and how are we using it? The question is, of course, let's say we don't do this in Jesus, but we do it in the black box down here, which is a much bigger space than this one. That would be also a challenge, because some experiences don't transport into the larger space, right? This closeness and these the closeness of the walls and everything wouldn't translate into the larger space so easily. We would have to consciously make that happen in some way. They might, if we could do it on the Jesus stage, but we cannot have darkness on the Jesus stage because then people will fall off the stage and it will be not ideal.
The sounds just wouldn't work with the rest of the piece, I don't think.
Are we thinking to do the same thing in both spaces?
No,
or
we're not. I'm just figuring out where we can put what.
Right.
What can happen where,
Well, the black box, it needs, I did also really like, because as you said, that way we squeezed the space for all of us, where Gabrielle at one point was behind the curtain, I think, right? He actually went back and was slithering along the wall and then appeared at the gap over here and terrified everybody. and there was so much of that, but it was also very cramped, and I kept, I was sort of in a couple of places on the floor, and I kept being very conscious of my body so that I wouldn't trip anyone, so that I wouldn't break up use of an important instrument. So that I was, but because of the crampedness of it, we actually were very attentive to the ways we were interacting with all of these different spatial elements. And that also probably brought the focus of the sound into and there were moments when, afterwards in our debrief, I remember some people said I was doing this and this and this, and someone else said, I don't remember ever hearing that, because it was going on at such a proximate level over here, and it was a little conversation between two people as opposed to sharing with. So it was, again, I was thinking, the video's not going to show much, it's going to be dark. I was wondering how you were doing with the apertures and stuff.
I was throwing light with my cell phone.
I remember that as well.
But I saw it in the video. I mean, and for me, there was like these moments when we see Felix
Yeah, there were moments,
Yeah.
but at
But
some
not-
point I decided
not
it's
that
not worth
much.
me
Well,
watching.
that's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
it was varied. We just gave up on the lights
Yeah.
too. We just stopped with all the lights
Yeah.
together. So anyway, just I think that's using the space. So
Mhm.
if we are going to use the black box, probably we would want to be in there before rehearsal day to get a sense of the space and what it affords us. But then also think about how to stage it with physical elements that might create both intimacy and then some obstacles for us to work around and with.
Well, and one of the things that was happening was these sort of very personal moments where we were playing intimately to people, like you mentioned, and I think that's also something that could happen, because I think that's one of the interesting ways in which to break out of the usual performative space where, you know, I'm on stage and you're over there. You know, what if I come up and I play my instrument right into your ear just for you, you know?
Mm.
And that could happen with any
Mhm.
any performance member. I mean, we could of course ask people if they're really uncomfortable with that. They could sit in a specific area and then they won't be touched. You know, I think that's important to
What
people
about-
opt the option. But we were also using our instruments often as kind of props and touching each other with them. And I thought that was an interesting way to.
I remember this
communicate.
discussion afterwards where Marianique said that you were blowing into her ear,
Mhm.
and then you said, no, I wasn't very near you, but my instrument was near you.
Mm.
And then Marianique said, but the sound was far away, only the blowing was near. So,
Yeah.
and you never resolved that paradox, right?
Oh, I know what I was doing. It was that I was blowing through the vocal, and then I had the wind way where you can
Mm.
feel the wind, but the sound is somewhere else.
Ah, okay.
So
There's
those
a-
kinds of things.
Yeah. Just in terms of the light, there's a piece for 3 percussionists where each person has flashlights taped to their arms. And so that's really interesting because you can't actually, that doesn't actually help you. It does nothing for you, but it does a lot for the audience. And there's basically the people are confined to a small space, maybe about like this big, and there are lots of different things around them. So there's a lot of reaching and a lot of like going behind people. And so what it ends up looking like usually is like kind of this many-armed monster where, because you can't see the people, only the light that they emit. And so that kind of idea where we each have something, I think, where a part of our body is very active. And I mean, or we can make it very active, you know. And so maybe to have those kinds of like, as opposed to complete darkness where maybe it's not so visually interesting to just have an improvisation in complete darkness. And also, just personally, I couldn't see my instrument. So that a lot of the iPhone light was just because I didn't know where anything I owned was. But that would also eliminate the need for someone to like decide to like produce light.
Right.
And then everyone would have some kind of, like, I'm not saying we should take flashlights to ourselves, but I think there are lots of different ways that you can attach light to yourself as a performer that would be interesting in a completely dark space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and
We
when
could
Improv
ask the
was
audience.
performing with light, because Felix was
Right,
behind
right.
running the light back and forth, and the thing was so alive,
Mhm.
both
Right.
making sound and making movement through
Yeah.
light.
And maybe this is a concert where we could ask the audience to switch their cell phones on. Please switch your cell phones on and use them during performance.
Well, I guess one of the things that struck me was that when you were talking about watching the video, you said, I stopped watching the video and closed my eyes. Which is, closing your eyes is a very deliberate act. It's not like you just stopped watching the video. So I was actually thinking that a combination of having parts where you could tell, for example, for the idea of proximity, if the audience has their eyes closed, if an audience member chooses not to participate, they could do it by just having their eyes open, so you would know that they wouldn't be comfortable with proximity. But if their eyes were closed, that would indicate a permission to approach.
Nice.
Nice, yeah.
That's very.
You know, so that
Visually
would be,
signifying.
yeah, so it means that the audience members don't have to, the idea of segregating members could be
Yeah.
difficult, but just that idea of open and close. And also, at a certain point, I was thinking, if it was on the stage, if, you know, if there's a staged area, that idea of also audience members choosing to light up a member. So in other words, that you wouldn't be lit, but any lighting, if they chose to highlight a performer, they would could do it by focusing their cell phones. So that's another way. But I actually really like the idea of just that sort of and I think the thing that I also like about the open and closing of the eyes, it means that an audience member could choose to change. You know, so it becomes a fluid act of participation on the part of the audience as well.
And if they're not wanting to be participating, which means their eyes are closed, they're going to be listening even more intensely.
Yeah. Well, no, if their eyes are closed, it would mean that you could approach.
Oh,
you
okay.
could
I see.
you could approach them. That would be the signal that they're open to that touch or proximity, that could occur.
Okay.
But because it's about opening and closing the eyes, they can change that dynamic.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Got it.
Can change very easily.
And perhaps if they're uncomfortable in the beginning and they have their eyes open and then
Exactly.
they see, oh, it's not dangerous, they might choose to.
Exactly, and that's kind of an interesting thing too.
It could be a number of different, maybe we could have that, certainly eyes shut, but even standing and sitting.
Yeah.
Gives you the option to have your eyes open and see, and also if you sit down, it means you want to participate, or if you stand up, it means you want to participate. Depending on whatever our speaking could be, but a lot of different sort of bodily stuff, and again, something that could be changed. Make a decision, okay, I no longer want to participate now that I just saw what that person got done to them.